Our second speaker, Professor John Tehranian, is an attorney, academic, and scholar, and also an author. He's a tenured professor of law at Chapman University School of Law, and is also a partner at One LLP, an entertainment and intellectual property and entertainment litigation firm with offices in Los Angeles and Orange County. He has previously served as professor of law at the University of Utah and as visiting professor of law at Loyola University, a graduate of Harvard University. He's the author of numerous works on intellectual property, laws, and culture, with a particular focus on issues of intellectual property, entertainment, civil rights, and race. He's the author of the book, Whitewashed, America's Invisible Middle Eastern Minority, an analysis of social and legal construction of race, and forthcoming book, Infringement Nations, from Oxford University, which examines a copyright of law in digital age. Please join me to welcome Professor John Tehranian.
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I want to thank everyone for the invitation. I also want to say a big thank you to, where's Nadia? Where'd she go? Has she left? Well, okay, she's out there, but you should realize that I've seen her around town doing events like this, or around the county, down in San Diego, up in LA, and she's doing a tireless job, and I think she really ought to be recognized for what an amazing job she's doing, because as I'm going to describe, this census is actually, as the motto goes, in our hands. And it's a tremendous opportunity for the Iranian American community to attain greater visibility. And this is central to sort of the political power and sort of getting a greater voice in American society. And so, please join me in clapping for Nadia, because she's doing a fabulous job. I've been very impressed. So you might wonder, based on my introduction, why on earth I'm talking about race and legal issues. After all, I'm an intellectual property litigator and an academic who mostly teaches about copyright and entertainment law. And truth be told, I'd much rather be talking about those issues. However, unfortunately, race is still an enduring and important issue in our society. And as I looked at the legal landscape as a starting academic back a number of years ago, I noticed that there was very little being discussed about the status of Middle Eastern Americans and about Iranian Americans in our society. And sort of the inspiration for my book, as I mentioned, as the introduction said, my book is called Whitewashed, America's Invisible Middle Eastern Minority. One of the reasons that we are invisible is largely because historically we've been classified as white by law, right? Now, many of you probably embrace that. Some of you encourage that, which is fine, but the fact is that I'm going to make a sort of a heretical proposition here, which is that our unilateral embrace of whiteness has in many cases come to our own detriment. Because at the end of the day, what happens is, by being lumped in simply the ambiguous category of whiteness, Iranian Americans have become invisible in our society. Now, you saw earlier when a gentleman asked what the number of Iranian Americans in our society was, and the answer was 338,000. Now, in this room, we probably know more than 338,000 Iranian Americans in the state of California alone, let alone the entire nation. That number is, in all likelihood, several orders of magnitude lower than what the real number is in terms of the Iranian American population. And why does this matter? Well, because it matters profoundly in terms of the political voice and power we have. All of you out here are successful professionals as Iranian Americans. I don't need to remind you what an incredibly well-educated group we are, how socioeconomically advantaged we are. Yet, at the end of the day, when you compare that to our political voice, it's borderline pathetic. We have almost no political voice, despite the amount of education we have in this room, despite the amount of wealth. And in part, that's because we've had this sort of catch-22 embrace of whiteness, where we prefer, in some ways, to be identified as white and not have the second question asked to us from the government, well, what's your ethnicity? So many Iranian Americans are simply checking the white box. Some others are checking the other box, but they're not checking the Iranian American box or filling that in. And to answer another question that was asked earlier, the question was, Well, why isn't there an Iranian American box or even a Middle Eastern American box? Well, the answer is power. There's been a shocking lack of power and voice from the Middle Eastern American community, from the Iranian American community. And I think legally, when you talk about what's going on in terms of our society, especially post 9/11, this is increasingly important to stand up and identify ourselves as Iranian Americans. One of the tenets of my book, I basically argue.
And I would like to ask you, what is your advice to the Iranian community with regard to the census 2010? Should they fill up the form or not stay away, or what is the best things to do?
I think absolutely they should fill out their forms, and I think it's of critical importance. I know there's a deep suspicion of government activity based on many of our own personal experiences dating back to Iran, but I think it's important to note that census information is kept private, that it's secure, and that it's critically important for the future political voice of the Iranian American community in the United States. The fact of the matter is under 400,000 Iranian Americans were counted in the last census. Now, most people who are Iranian know that that is a dramatic undercount of the real Iranian American population. And unfortunately, what that means, though, is to the rest of American society, people think there are not that many Iranian Americans. So it means we don't have a political voice. And I think it's of critical importance in terms of our participation in the body politic to get involved, to make sure you fill out your census form, and to complete it to the best of your ability.
You mentioned also in your speech that if the Iranian being counted correctly, there is a lot of power that they can gain by that, correct? Would you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. I mean, politicians, when they're doing sort of fundraising or trying to appeal to their constituents, often look at census data to determine the population and the demographics. And the fact of the matter is, the greater the number of Iranian Americans that are counted in the census, the more politicians will listen to the Iranian American community and address issues of interest. So I think it is of critical importance.
A Persian community, they have their own TV, but they are not into the mainstream of American media. And the media has a lot of effect to change things. I mean, media can make us all what we are now, and they can make us much better. What is your reaction? How do we utilize the media in a positive way?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, the simple step of identifying as Iranian American and showing sort of in the mass media positive examples of Iranian Americans and all that we are doing in the country that's good, instead of the average American simply sees images of negative images with respect to Iranian Americans or with respect to Iranians. And I think it's important to counteract those images. So I think that's an important first step. And I think, as we're a relatively young immigrant group, having mostly come to the country over the last 20, 25 years, and I think as the Iranians continue to live in the United States and we continue to take part in the political process, we're going to get increasingly better exposure in the media. And I think that's an important part of the entire process.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, you are watching Tapesh. We'll be right back.
So my argument to all of you is go out there, identify yourselves as Iranian American. If you write Persian American, that's fine. Iranian American, Iranian, whatever you write in that box, it's of tremendous importance, because at the end of the day, when politicians look to see who their constituency is, they look at the numbers from the census. And so every politician, you can bet, knows the number of Asian Americans in their community or Latino Americans in their community. Not so much for Iranian Americans. And so as a result, it's not that much of a surprise that the highest elected Iranian American official in the United States is the mayor of Beverly Hills. Now, that's a first step, but we can certainly do a lot better than that. And I think that's something we need to focus on. That's why the US Census and reaching out and telling all of your friends, all your family members, to make sure to identify themselves is profoundly important.